to Created. And this week we have a fun new format. We have our first guest in where we've developed in collaboration with Plank Skip founder Daniel. We'll be working to feature a new special guest each week to address a topic, expanding audience. We'll be having a bit of fun with the introduction, inviting to guess the main religious perspective or philosophical guest as to how that framework and their perspective fits into the theme of this show of God, which is to explore the role of religion in society. Of the late Stan Lee, we will be awarding a soon-to-be coveted to the audience member who comes closest to the truth of our guest. So, and welcome this week's guest, Luis Enrique Rivera Cuyar. It is an amalgamation of art and war struck in the fire with knowledge in media, business, and amazing creations of unconstitutional awakening. And he has a podcast and a personal page in the chat and the show notes. So welcome, Luis. Thank you for.
Thank you all for having me. It's an honor. Thank you for this interesting opening. Yeah, life has been interesting, and I love to be here today.
Well, speaking of your life, we were hoping that you could start with sharing a nice nutshell of the first 14 years of your life. You guys, I have an automatic that just started. Let me just turn it off. There we go. I'm so sorry. It goes off automatic. Yes, so the first 14 years of your life, the experiences that shaped you and sort of for your worldview now. And I just wanted to remind you that we have this prize going to guess your, main religious perspective. So only drop hint goes, but we love that nutshell of your formative experiences.
Well, I would say that growing up in San Juan, Puerto Rico, it was a very interesting 14 years. There's parts of my life that I could say openly were very traumatic, and then parts of my life that were very lovely. I grew up in a bilingual home with my mom, and yeah, it was something that allowed me to see the world through a female perspective primarily, and allowed me to really understand the value of respect that comes from just understanding that we live in a society that views people differently depending on their upbringing, which is something we don't try to think about, but we have these unconscious biases. And growing up, I realized with time, okay, there's certain differences between me and other people. And slowly, as I grew up, I found more and more differences. So I will say, on that perspective, discovering you're different early on, it's kind of an adventure. And then when you're discovering an adult, you're very, very different, becomes an even greater adventure. But definitely, San Juan allowed me to see what I would say is like movies. Like when you see movies, you think, oh, those things don't happen, but no, everything happens in Puerto Rico. Everything
Yeah.
happens. It's an interesting environment.
Another question I wanted to ask you was how you see the role of sort of with the assumption that personal to kick in at around 15. So like your experiences up to 14, 15 when you start to be more of your own agent, and how responsibility.
Well, I will definitely say that around, I would say 16 is 9/11 in my case. And my experience of 9/11, I guess, was its own different trauma. I mean, a lot of people knew a lot of people in New York, even though we're in San Juan, we're in Puerto Rico. A lot of people we knew, we were there. Even I have my aunt that was living there at the time, worked for Columbia University. So, worry exists no matter what situation you're in. And it was soon after that that it allowed me also to question things. It started to push the idea that we must question everything we're being told, because I'm telling you, on that very day, my classmates were telling me everything accurately. People like people a few grades higher were telling me everything that later on was proven to be the propaganda that was portrayed, and this was in literally less than an hour into it. And it was not because they were watching the news. So it was really fascinating to see that side of reality, and then slowly realize, okay, we got to start questioning the narratives we are told every single day, because there are people that look to shape our realities to whatever fits their needs. So that really allowed me to start questioning things and change perspective
Interesting.
in many
I
ways.
want to like dog ear this part right here because I don't want to get this on our personal tangent here, but I'm so intrigued in what your classmates were telling you, and like how was it just like their gut instinct or whatever. But before I do be a good MC and carry this whole show here, and get it off to the right track. So that concept of personal responsibility and questioning the narrative that you started for was starting to really take shape around that age when you were 16. Like how that has continued, how does that inform what you do now and like choose to, I guess, make good in the world?
So I would say mainly it has opened doors for me, because when I speak to different people of different backgrounds, we can sometimes get very deep into different subjects, because we try to speak directly to what is reality, and not the fluff and the buff and all of the glitz and glamour that is portrayed to you on television, that is meant to distract you. But then you meet people that want to actually speak on the subjects that matter, that define our lives, that make our lives exactly what it is. It's not the constant delusion that we are being fed on television in order to distract us, in order to not pay attention. I mean, sports, even though it's very interesting and fascinating thing, the human ability to create like, these amazing moves, it's a distraction at the end of the day. Like, you want to distract the biggest and tallest humans and the most powerful humans. You want to distract them with money, because you know what power they can wield in society if they were not distracted by sports? It's very fascinating, like how we've built Rome in just a different way with different colors.
Very true. Very true. What?
Yes, check. I was just gonna say about the audio, but we'll check right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I'll go ahead and jump in here. Is everybody able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So, Jacqueline, I'm not sure if you were aware, but there's some problems with your audio. And um, the platform is suggesting trying to restart that. In the meantime, thank you so much. I'll jump in here and say that, or remind the audience, especially if they weren't able to hear what Jacqueline said, we're offering a prize. It's called the No Prize. And the No Prize is in honor of the late Stan Lee, who's considered the founding father of Marvel. It goes way back to when he was just doing comic books, and the avid readers could spot abnormalities or point out key things, and he would award them the No Prize. Well, we're going to do this each week. We'd like for you, based on what Luis has shared so far, to share with us in the chat your thoughts about where he is philosophically, religiously. What's your initial take on him and how you feel he's going to be engaging the world? This will come clearer as we jump into the topic of the show, which today is titled Waking the woke. And Louis, I'd like to jump in from there into some of the things that you've said. Now, obviously, the woke is a label on a segment of society. And it's anytime we use a label, it's somewhat unfair, right? It paints with a broad brush. It's a caricature, right? There are caricatures of all kinds of segments of society. Some of them are completely unacceptable. This does try to describe a certain approach, a certain perspective, as would the terms conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat, um, anarchist, whatever, libertarian. There are all these labels. We've chosen to use the word woke, waking the woke. So, in particular, I'd like to quote a famous billionaire to introduce this topic. Elon Musk, been in the news a lot lately. The latest Twitter bombshell that just came out is that he's about to release private internal Twitter documents that discuss, and I'm not even going to go there to drop into that particular rabbit hole, but to discuss one particular news story that was suppressed at a key moment in history that many feel had an enormous or significant impact. So
You mean the magic laptop?
Elon Musk, Elon Musk, now the owner of Twitter, now the chief god of Twitter, said the following as he issued his woke mind virus warning a few days ago, before that latest bombshell. Quote, there is currently great danger that social media will splinter into far right-wing and far left-wing echo chambers that generate more hate and divide our society. So we're going to talk about just one segment today, and that's the woke segment. So whatever that means to you, Louis, how does the points you've made so far about your heritage and how that formed and shaped your ability to dive into the real topics and the news behind the news, if you will, and search out a perspective that is getting closer to reality versus just the distractions and the labels. So how would you address that topic to kick off tonight's discussion?
I would say that I grew up with what I would describe as pretty traditional liberal values around me. And when it comes to things like everything progressive, like I was very progressive in certain things and very conservative in a few other things. But progressive in what I would call the things that matter, like universal health care, LGBT rights to a certain extent, and all these things that make sense because equality of opportunity in relationship to just living your life should not be hindered by bizarre blockades that a few people wrote 200-300 years ago that shouldn't stop people from existing. So now the problem is it's gotten overboard, right? We've gone from correction to overcorrection. So that's what it looks like to some people. I would say that we're like the left went so far left that they went all the way around and hit fascism. And so so we are now experiencing this bizarre version of neo-fascism, where corporations are in direct collaboration with the government and speech is being actively altered and manipulated through algorithms on purpose to alter the minds of the people. This is not a theory. This is fact. This is how governments operate. Facebook was the first large investor, was one of the largest was In-Q-Tel when it first started through PayPal and others. So In-Q-Tel is a division of the CIA, the venture capital arm. So that gives you an idea. Also, Google, and which was called Backrub, and Twitter had initial investments from government-based entities. So you could say that we are similar to the CCP in the relationship of government and corporations. The difference is we're really good at hiding it. The Chinese are terrible at it.
So there are many rabbit holes we can go deeply down into. One that I'll just bring up here that some may not be aware of is that going back into the, you know, the initial space race era, between the US and the Soviet Union, and subsequently the Cold War, major disinformation campaigns began to expand their power and their reach even back then with existing technologies and existing medias, right? I'm sure you're familiar with that. And, Russia and the KBG in particular, um, you know, let's just say with their focus on playing grandmaster chess, thinking in long term, many
Well,
subtle moves.
we bankrupt them through the space race, so that was a smart move on our part.
Well, we did engage with that, right? And later on, we bankrupted their communist system that wasn't functional. I actually lived in Europe and traveled extensively in the Eastern Bloc countries at the time Gorbachev was coming to power, and the American president was launching Star Wars, right? And the Soviet Union was trying to keep up, and again, bankrupting their economy. East Germany at that time was considered the world's 10th largest economy. And when the wall came down and the reunification of Germany happened, and I know this from firsthand experience because I was living in Germany at the time, it almost bankrupted West Germany because it was all a fraud, right? The economic power of those nations was very much trumped up, right? So, but my point is warfare, right? Sophisticated psychological warfare has been going on for many, many decades, and perhaps has been amplified with the latest technology, social media, whatnot, right? So, but how is that overall? I'm not so much interested in trying to go down those rabbit holes, which have to get so deep. But what is the impact of this, rather than getting into the dark corners and who's behind it? What is the impact on people, right? So getting back to this question of waking the woke, how is it that people are trapped in these echo chambers, and what can be done to help them open their eyes and see something other than that which they've been led to believe?
I would say transparency. The WikiLeaks was one of the most powerful light sources we had for a very long time, and it's very sad that Julian Assange has been treated
I agree.
as a horrific criminal when he he did a lot of things. So he worked in disclosing information about fraudulent elections in different countries in Africa, and he became famous because of the revelations of Collateral Murder. That was the film that was basically a U.S. military just blindly murdering innocent people, and including two journalists. And that type of transparency allows people to understand objective reality. And right now you can see that the idea that people are being separated is happening in Brazil. Brazil right now, it looks like they had a sketchy election, and the government of Brazil is getting backing by the military saying, yeah, this election wasn't real. So they're not certifying the election in Brazil.
Wow.
And the military is backing Bolsonaro because it looks like potentially corruption might have actually happened. I am not an expert in Brazilian politics, so I will just basically, on the surface level, there's something to be questioned. So that's the point, is that separation happens in Brazil as well. Brazil, I would call like America, but with even less than there's almost no limits in Brazil. In some ways, it is similar to the United States in relationship to, you can do almost anything in Brazil. So in many respects, and Brazilians are very hardworking individuals. They're very similar to Americans in different ways. They're just speaking Portuguese.
I do recall when I was living in Germany and I had my first opportunity to travel Russia, I was surprised at certain characteristics of Soviet society that immediately jumped out at me as having a lot of commonality with the United States. In some ways, even more so with Europe. And I, at the time, ascribed it to the fact that they were the other global superpower, right? It was the United States and the Soviets. So there was a certain culture or national characteristics that arose from that, you might call it station or stature on the global scene. Certain, I don't know, attitudes or approaches to things that seem to me to be related not to a commonality of its people, but rather a commonality of their place in the world in geopolitics.
Also, I would say hardworking people showcase like their culture more often. So I would say, for example, in Africa, Nigerians, I mean, any Nigerian you meet over here, they're always hardworking. They're always on it. They're always working to create something better for themselves. When you meet Koreans, you see that same energy. And look at their country. Their country went basically from the Stone Age instantaneously into the 21st century in less than 70 years. I mean, you can even compare Vietnam as an example, and Vietnam has not progressed massively as South Korea has. And it's not because they magically had an extra, it's because of something related to the culture. Culture matters when it comes to the ethics that bind our society. Of course, no country's perfect, no culture is perfect. People are like, oh, what's best? I mean, there's no perfect culture.
Right.
That's an illusion. Like, there's you could
Amen.
say religion, it's like there's nothing that's perfect. We're all working to try to create a better environment for ourselves and our communities, but it's not easy.
Well,
and yeah.
Welcome back, Jacqueline. So
Hey.
we're into this topic now of waking the woke. So I want to go into this item that you just raised, Louis, hardworking, right? So the role of religion in society. Going back to the book of Genesis, the very first commandment that God gave to our species was dress and keep the garden. The second one was be fruitful and multiply. That's the one that we've all followed, and man became the most invasive species, the planet has ever seen.
Have you seen ants? They actually weigh more biomass than we do. If you didn't know, there's more ants in terms of biomass on Earth than there is humans.
They're absolutely successful as a species, absolutely. And yet we are the ones who could perhaps potentially even destroy their habitat, right? We have certainly survived and thrived despite the ants. Maybe they have despite us as well. Interesting, the Bible says, go to the ant, thou sluggard, right? In other words, this topic of hard working, the Bible points us to the ants as an example of hard work, right? And in the context of the Proverbs of Solomon, it says some people are so lazy, they've got the spoon in the bowl, but they're too lazy to even bring it to their mouth to feed themselves, right? So in the Baha'i faith, work is elevated to the level of worship, right? So this concept of being hardworking, right? To me, and I'm going to generalize here, but this woke ideology is not so much about taking personal responsibility for your circumstances and working hard to improve your circumstances, but rather to find some broader societal ill or evil and address that. I'm saying it positively. To say it negatively, and all you on something else. In fact, find original sin that you can identify, such as slavery in this nation, right? And point to the fact that certain founders of our nation, in keeping with what the whole world was doing at that time, had slaves. And because of that, we can declare this nation to have been so born in sin that that stench can never be gotten rid of. And that can be the reason and the excuse for any lack of progress of certain groups of people. Now, I'm certainly not here to whitewash slavery. That's not my point. But rather than focus on what can I do right now, how can I overcome whatever challenges are in my way, right? The challenges of systemic racism, which I don't deny exists in 2022, pale into insignificance to the challenges that people had in the 1700s and 1800s to make their way on this continent and to find a land, till that land, grow their food, protect their family against the harsh elements of winter or whatever it was. The hard work and effort that was needed historically to be successful in America is today in the woke world a completely different discussion. What are your thoughts on that?
So, purpose. If you have no purpose, then you have no drive. You can hear about how some millennials, which I'm in part of, and some Gen Z is like, oh, the world's going to end. What's the point? Firstly, the world's not going to end. Uh, None of that stuff is actually correct. If you actually look at those details, they're just exaggerating things to do a sales job. But outside of that, purpose is the reason why a lot of these people just have nothing to look forward to and nothing to look at properly, so they just find enemies. So if you're bored and you are distracted by everything, all this input, because if you think about it, this little black mirror that we all have, it gave us access to unlimited amount of information and also a great brainwashing system. Because if you're not watching out, it's slowly directing you to a certain direction. Advertising works. Propaganda works. People are like, oh, that doesn't work on me. Like, and then there's ways and you can trick them into it. I mean, I'll say that's very evil to do, but you can actually trick a friend if you work your things right to incentivize them to do something without ever telling them to do it. And you by hinting subconsciously, and that's how advertising actually works. So it's purpose,
Yeah.
and because our automated systems have gotten, and automation is going to only get worse. That then makes it so a lot of people, especially in small towns, they don't know what the heck they're going to do. They just see their families around them. They see that this devastation, and that's part of the reason the drug epidemic is so insane. Globally, the drug epidemic is skyrocketed. Opiate use is never been higher than it is today. And there's a lot of factors involved. You can even say this is the opium wars against the world, China against the world, throwing fentanyl against the planet, as they were thrown in the 1800s that devastated the country.
Well, speaking of resource that is coming from China, TikTok. Jill, I'd like to invite you into this conversation because I know you and your family traveled back to Wisconsin, which is where we met. Jill and her family are down in Florida right now after having moved from Wisconsin. But you were back with us this summer for a camp in which we took our children out of that world, took away their phones. And we've, of course, had many discussions about our daughters on TikTok and, our sons on Roblox and the games. So I'd like to invite you to comment on this as a mother who's been very focused on making sure that despite living in this modern world and having to raise a family that is not, isolated in some mountain wearing tinfoil hats. What are your thoughts on this in terms of how to help your children navigate through this kind of world that Lewis was referring to, of this constant distraction and all the echo chambers and everything we're talking about? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with him. It's about discernment, so I'm trying to teach my children discernment because everything, as Lewis was saying, that you see, you don't know where the truth is and where the lie is and what they want you to do. So, with my kids, I'm just trying to teach them balance, balance and discernment. They're on TikTok. I don't love TikTok because they scroll. I don't know. I know you, Wade, are around your kids, but my kids get on that TikTok and out, like they will just, it's like it sucks them in and they just scroll and they scroll. And so, teaching them to to have balance and also to discern what they're watching. My kids will come up, I can't give you an example right now, but they'll say, well, if you do this, this happens, right? I'm like, are you sure about that? Like, who told you that? Where'd you get that information? So it's a challenge. It's really a challenge to raise kids right now.
Your daughters will hate me for revealing this, but it may give you some help. We took TikTok away from Zoe a week ago, and we made her delete it because of the recent, additional information about the security and the spying that is going on through TikTok, and we just
was
didn't
way
want it
worse
in our
than
home.
you think. Right. I'll tell you that.
Right. But we're also, because we are about to travel to Israel, and so we're going on a pilgrimage, and so we just said, you know what, you're gonna maybe get it back, when we get back, end of January. But we want to do this experiment. We want to prepare ourselves spiritually. We're all doing certain things to sort of cleanse and purify our lives to a degree before we go on this spiritual pilgrimage to Israel. So, because, the kids are always, well, everybody else is doing it. Well, Zoe doesn't have TikTok anymore, just so you know.
Good for you. That's impressive. That's really, how many days has it been?
It's been like 10 days, and the first 2 or 3 were kind of hard, and then she kept coming up with some really good logic and reasons. I mean, I remember when they wanted to try coffee, and we said, well, you go study it and write a paper and convince me that it's okay for kids to have coffee. And she was only like 11, right? And she did, and she and her friend went and they came up with a little report, and we agreed that it would be okay for them to try coffee in small doses because they showed that the jury is still out on whether coffee is hurtful or helpful, even to kids at a certain age. So we let them have a little coffee. So that's, she can go and do her own research on TikTok and try to convince me that it's not spyware. But that the Chinese have their own version of TikTok for their children, right? Though the version of TikTok that's for the West is not available for Chinese kids. The version of TikTok in China has like educational videos and science experiments, and all the other crap is not on it.
Way different. Yeah, I read that about them too. Very, very different.
So Jacqueline, you have somebody wrote in the chat, what is the purpose of a human being? And we haven't talked about your art today or your blog, your particular approach with art. You want to just share a couple of thoughts around this question and what your work is as far as how you address this? And then Louis will come back to you for some more comments.
Yeah, that's a huge question. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
You sound great now.
Yeah. So that's a great way to intro that question, Wade. So my work is spiritual realism. So it's a blend of realistic imagery with abstract expressionist elements that represent the unseen forces of our lives. And I think that that is actually the world and the reality that we move in, that we have a material nature, and then we have a spiritual nature, and there's spiritual forces of guidance and prayer and intuition and angels or concourse on high, or whatever you call it. Like, our lives are this mingling of both the material and the unseen mystical element of life. And so the art is just a playful way to show them both overlapping. But it's also a play on words that two things: that our true nature, it's spiritual realism, so our true nature is spiritual, and then also to be real about that path that we walk, that the spiritual path in this life is usually very rocky, and we like bump into each other and we get stub toes and all of that stuff. So it's like multi layers there. But ultimately, to be a human, the purpose of a human life is, I think, to develop some awareness of that spiritual element of who we are. And I think children actually are pretty innately connected to that realm, but we kind of lose it as we grow up. But then the purpose is to reconnect with that deeply and to honor that purpose, to honor the fact that our lives are not just the material, mundane cares of our lives, but rather that we're here for this larger purpose, which is the development of our souls, that unseen spiritual part. And it's not just a personal thing, it's also like what we do in this life to engage with others and try to make the world a better place.
Thank you. One of the key messages of this show is that created in the image of God, the role of religion in society. I'm going to spend 1 or 2 minutes unpacking this, and then Louis, I want to come back to you on the subject of art and what Jacqueline just said. My personal view, which the wrapper around this show, is we are created in the image of God. The book of Genesis says that he created us in his image, male and female created he them. And then you have this serpent who is the antagonist or the negative protagonist of that story, who comes in and says, look, God gave you two trees. He says, hey, you're in this great garden, right? You can eat anything here, right? And Adam or Eve, no, he actually forbade us. We can eat of all the trees except this one tree. And then the serpent says, yeah, right, because God knows in the day that you eat of that tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, in the day you eat of that tree, you will become like God, knowing good and evil. And he says, you're not going to die, which God said you would. You're not going to die. You're going to become like God. Well, the hidden message here is that, look, they were already like God. They were created in God's likeness, right? So they already had that capacity. But by confusing them and sending them down kind of a negative path in their pursuit of awareness, knowledge, understanding, it twisted everything up. So the created in the image of God part is that, right? The role of religion in society, as we've emphasized over and over, is to be non-coercive. Religion is never coercive unless it's corrupted. So if religion is coercive, it is a corrupt religion. It is transgressing and violating against the spiritual teachings of its founder. The spiritual teachings of the founder of any great religion is inspiring people to remember and reclaim those aspects of their character, of their being, that are God-like, to cultivate the virtues that are God-like, right? But religion's role is to inspire. So, quick question back to you, Jacqueline, and then I want to hear from you, Louis, on because I know you're involved in art and fashion as well. But Jacqueline, tell us a little bit about that inspirational aspect and how that plays into the art that you do. Does your art inspire? And if so, how does it inspire?
Well, I certainly hope so. That's really up for the individual viewer to say. But there's a lot that goes on into all forms of art, and particularly ones that are handmade. There's a connection with another soul and the struggle that they went through to create something. And, there's sort of a mingling of your life story with their life story as you look at the art and stuff. But so there's just the whole energetic aspect of handmade art, even if it's a vase or a bowl, there's this soul mingling, I think. But with visual art in particular, and with mine, I hope that it does give people a sense of like a deep breath and a remembrance of those unseen forces in their life, and that it helps people remember that we're all in the middle of our own story, and everything that's unfinished in our lives and all of our questions and our past and our future, that we're in this unknown moment right now, like that's not finished. And I think that is a good remembrance to give us peace, to know that we're part of a bigger story. And that it's not all, we don't have all the answers yet. And we're living something beautiful, hopefully, is what it helps people remember.
Awesome. Thank you. What's your thoughts on that? and your own work in the area of fashion, or unless understood, you have so many different and varied interests.
Yes, I've worked as a photographer, I worked as a cinematographer, and I've looked at many fields, also working in commerce, and real estate. So yes, I'm in several fields. And I'll say with art, and I'd like to see this art now more than ever.
Me too.
It sounds wonderful. The other day I got this lesson about through time, the concept of trauma transferring through time. So your story sometimes ends abruptly, but to an extent, that energy through time. And the people that come after you can have part of you in that energy that you are representing. So sometimes you could be expressing your art and there could be a part of your great grandfather or grandmother in you being expressed through that expression. And that then can also connect to somebody on the other side of the planet that had the exact same emotion and same experience to an extent. And because if the more you speak to everybody around the world, you will notice collectively we are way more like alike than we are different. It doesn't matter that somebody grew up with a completely different television like landscape, cultural landscape, like everything. Even if they grew up with a completely different landscape, because I've been meeting people from all over the world, and I can tell you, how can we get along so perfectly? Even like, yes, we are speaking English, but we didn't watch anything that was identical when we were growing up. So when it comes to speaking to each other, I was talking again before, what connects us on an international level is reality, and culture, and the pop culture is just the fluff. So it's trying
Amen.
to ask
So
the question.
I could not have paid you enough to tee up better my next word from our sponsor, right? So this program is supported by a number of people, one of which is Something or Other Publishing. And this is the latest bestseller, the latest international. Actually, let me see if I can flip the mirror on this so that you can actually read. There we go. Women Right Now, right? We've been working on this book for 2.5 years. Women Right Now is a collection of stories. It says at the top, a collection of intimate stories by women who have experienced trauma. It's curated by Edna White out of New York. And Edna is an African-American woman who runs workshops for writers and also helps women in trauma. We've been working on this for 2.5 years. It's come out. It's a #1 rated hot new release, bestseller across multiple categories on Amazon. It is a collection of stories of women from around the world who are telling their stories. And this is exactly what you talked about, the commonality of these stories. And even those stories that are radically different, right? The trauma is very different, yet the experience and the reaction and how that woman processed it and the lessons that were taken away from it and the challenges of, moving forward, overcoming it. We wanted to give the opportunity to women whose voices would normally not be heard and allow them to tell their short stories and reach an international audience. So Women Right Now, Volume 1, this is a series that will be continuing. You can get this right now on Amazon. And I'd also like to announce Plank Sip, which is another one of our co-sponsors who is helping us with this show, especially the new format. We're about to launch another anthology series with Plank Sip as well of stories and perspectives from people around the world. So I had to throw that word from our sponsor out there. You can go get that book on Amazon by Kindle or print, and or you can reach out to us and we can send you a copy. So well said, Lewis, in terms of connecting one-on-one, the noise to what's called signal to noise ratio that is put out around us that keeps us from connecting with the heart and soul of another human being, right? That phone, it's so funny you held that up, but you see these images of people who 50 years ago they would have been talking to each other in any given situation. They're all glued to their phone and isolated even while they're sitting next to each other, which again is, Jill, why we took the phones away from the kids that came to the camp. And I remember some of the discussions with them on the first night. And,
and the
I remember
sneaky stuff, the sneaking in and like the trying to figure out a way to get around it.
Well, but even more interesting, right? We had a couple of, so we had a whole bunch of people helping us pull this off. Some of them were teachers in the public school system, and their input into this is you can't take the kids' phones away. You can't do that.
Which is, I disagree with completely.
Yeah,
I disagree.
They won't do that. They won't want that.
The system doesn't want that. System wants you to be
It's complete and total capitulation, right? who is the adult in the room here?
It's crazy. It's crazy.
It's not the American school system.
Right. I agree. We take breaks all the time. Our kids take breaks off all electronics. We don't watch TV much. I mean, we do watch movies and things like that, but it's good to have that break for your brain. I mean, it's good for adults. I mean, I go to restaurants all the time and I see, husbands and wives sitting next to each other on their phones, not communicating. It's so interesting. It's so interesting.
We have a hard and fast rule: no phones at any meal, no devices at any meal.
And
that you even have to set up such a rule.
You've seen the stack rule. You've seen the stack rule. So if you have a lot of people, you can have a game where basically the first one that grabs the phone pays for everything.
Ooh, I like it.
But if you have like 12, 14 people, you are screwed. You grab that phone. So then you put all the phones on a stack so everybody can watch them. I mean, honestly, you should just turn it off. Right. And yeah, I've seen that game played before. And in small groups, it's actually not a bad idea because the point is to be present. I remember hearing about this engineer that works for Red, which is a camera company, and he designs the technology itself. And he says, there's almost no technology in my house. Like there's no screens. There, like the bare bones, simplest stuff. There is no Wi-Fi. There is nothing electronic that isn't absolutely necessary. Nothing electronic was present. Wow. And this is a person that creates chips, like that works in designing of microchips. But when it comes to his house, it's a sanctuary. And like that's the reason, I don't know if you've heard, but Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were known to say that our kids don't have access to these devices until they were like 10. And while it's a very complicated thing to say what's the impact, there is potentially an impact, because if there's no oversight, then yes, there could be a lot of dangers. I mean, the amount of child content on TikTok is disturbing. Yes. And when you mentioned Twitter, I wanted to mention Elon Musk in less than a month has started to purge all of the child content on the platform.
Right. He's done a great job.
Something that nobody was doing. 7,000 employees.
Isn't that crazy? I mean, it's crazy to me that like that should be a priority, right?
Well, he said priority number one before all the other stuff. We first have to get rid of this, and this is the thing: one of the largest reservoirs of that content is Facebook and Google. Wow! And you don't see them doing it. I can share later a good mini doc on just Google Photos. Be careful of your settings on Google. Your child's pictures could be used by other people.
And then Photoshop, right? Photoshop their faces and stuff?
No. The Photos app on your Google device that's connected to your Google account, if it's backing up all your images and it's connected to your Google account, there could be people potentially looking at your albums.
Yeah, I've heard that before. I don't have anything on Google, thank goodness, but I have heard that before.
Any cloud services, they have a system where if you, let's say, upload content that is of the bad kind, they're supposed to have a comparison system and then determine, oh, that's bad content, and delete it. We've had this technology for a couple of years now, yet you barely see any real action against it. And then you have to ask yourself, so who are the people that are allowing these types of systems to continue? And I mean, it's the people that are pushing things like minor attracted person.
Right.
And that goes back to the woke narrative of just allowing people that are minor attracted to be okay in society. And like my good friend Jim Bob says, no, introduce them to Chippy. I won't say what Chippy is, but Chippy chips away.
But that's been going on for a long time, right? They're slowly trying to normalize that as well. At least that's the things that I've seen where it's like, what's happening?
It's not an illusion. It's happening.
That
is
really and I know it's crazy though, right? And like if I try to talk to like my parents or certain people, they're completely unaware of that happening, but it is happening, and I've seen it too.
Oh, so my mom had no clue about a lot of things recently. I mentioned to her, hey, do you know that this and that about different topics. And she was like, what?
Mhm.
What's happening? Oh, don't tell me.
Mhm.
Just don't tell me. Just
No, because they don't really want to know either, right? They
no,
don't
and
really
I get
want to
it.
know.
I get it. Like, you're in the 60s. You just wanna like live life in a certain way and not hear about
Coast.
all those things.
Well, I think this is one thing I want to spend a moment on, and that is that in the last several years, there has been about against especially those aspects of the woke movement. And again, the broad brush to call it woke. There are other ways we could perhaps describe it, but the school board moms, right? And across the United States in particular, which is what I'm more familiar with, people have begun speaking up at their school board meetings because of the things that have been going on in the schools, the types of teachers who are hired, the agendas that some of those teachers have in the classroom. Jacqueline, you and I were talking a few weeks ago about how the person who used to loiter around playgrounds in order to sort of get children into private conversations about sexual topics now gets to preside over a group of children in a classroom where they are held hostage and forced to have those kinds of discussions that are under no imaginable circumstances age appropriate. And yet there's an entire agenda that somehow thinks that these kinds of discussions are age appropriate or necessary, right? And so parents have been standing up in school board meetings and becoming quite vocal, right, and insistent. And yet the reaction of some areas of our society has been to criminalize them and even characterize them as domestic terrorists, right? How real is that? How is that fake news, or is that actually going on? What's your thought on that, Lewis? I assume you're
Well,
aware of it.
the domestic,
I don't know if
yeah, of course, the
we actually
domestic
didn't talk.
terrorist label was real. The domestic terrorist label was real. The Biden administration is out of control. The FBI is ran by a bunch of lunatics now. I mean, the FBI has been ran by a bunch of lunatics for a very long time. But now it's just like there's been a lot of people that have been caught actively doing things that were politically motivated. So there's a lot of problems with just how law enforcement is accomplished in this country. And to begin with, if you just look at Biden, this person put in jail over 1 million people by his actions in the 90s. And, there's no actions instead of making everything worse. And we're now seeing the pattern. Why is crime rising all across the country? It's rising globally to an extent. But why is it rising all across the country is because you could say, first of all, in New York, I don't know if I'm having a glitch. In New York, cashless bail happened, and there was a case of a person that recently passed away because the person that was arrested like 18 times just killed an old man. Just pushed him and cracked his skull and killed him. Why? He was arrested multiple times. Nothing happened. They keep releasing him. They keep releasing him. These are tactics that destabilize cities. And these tactics allow rich people to take in and absorb. So it's just rich people screwing around with society.
Mhm.
And we're seeing the consequences of what happens when rich people get to do whatever the heck they want. And then a small group of people that also see that, wait, if they're doing all this stuff, then I can do whatever the heck I want. So it also gives the liberty to other people to think that they can do whatever the hell they want without any consequences. So it's creating these effects on society that are extremely negative because the illusion that you can just do whatever you want without consequence is very attractive.
So I'd like to sort of wrap up this segment as we move into the close of the hour here. Jill, by once again inviting you to share a couple of your personal experiences with your children. This isn't a theory. This isn't an ideology, but rather you've had to make certain choices, right? And I'm not asking you to share, anything too personal, but how have you, as a mother raising 3 children, one of do you have two teenagers now, actually?
I do. She just turned 13.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and your older daughter is 15, right? So,
Yeah.
um, what are some of the choices and decisions that you've made along the way as you've become more aware of this and seen, the negative impact on your children of some of the things that go on in the name of education?
Yeah, well, back to what you were talking about before was, the school districts and the parents speaking out. And, we just decided that we were just going to homeschool our kids. I don't think that kids need to be aware of those things when they're so young. And it upsets me so much. When we moved to Florida, we homeschooled them for another year. And of course, having two teenagers now, they both really want to go to school. So they're very social beings. So we found a school here that is a hybrid Christian school. It is. I don't want to say it's necessarily hard, but they vet you. They really vet you and your values and your morals. I had to answer lots of questions. I had to have a whole bunch of character references for my family. And so they go to school 2 days a week now, and then I homeschool them the other 3 days. And it's actually really been amazing. But as far as the public school district or going to a public school, that's not going to happen anytime in their future. Like, this is my plan, and I have no problem pulling them out of school tomorrow and homeschooling them all over again. I need to protect them, and I need to be the person that they come to for the answers, not some random person at a school. And that's how I feel like it's gauged now. I feel like they criminalize these parents for speaking out because they don't want the parents involved in their kids' life. That's how I feel. Whether or not that's right, I don't know. But I feel like our voices are diminished, and we should be the most important voices of our children's lives.
You can show
Well, this
pornography
area,
to children. That's the new narrative. I
right?
mean, there was a
Right.
case in the court, and
Exactly.
they were showcasing the book. They're like, "Don't show that." I'm like, "This is what the book." They were just reading the book, and they were not allowed to read the book, and they
In
were
the
not allowed to
meeting.
show the book in the meeting. And they're like, "But this is
Right.
exactly what you're showing to my kid. This is
Yes.
exactly what you're giving them access to."
Yeah.
And over sexualizing children at a very early age has no purpose. Because
No.
to begin with, morality starts at 7, 8 years old is when you start conceptualizing the concept of morality to a child. Of course, that varies. And then sexuality itself, it comes around the time of purity. There's no need to just push their minds into different directions. Just allow them to
Right.
exist and be who
Yes.
they want to be.
Well, it's interesting because my kids, now that they're in school, what I've seen, it's so interesting. Elena's going to be 16, and, she has there's boys that she'll be like, oh, they're cute, but she's not boy crazy by any stretch of the imagination. But everybody that she's surrounded, even in this beautiful school, it's just so weird. To me, like, these kids, that's some of the things they post. My kids share a lot of things with me that I'm thankful that they share with me. But these kids are very sexualized, and they're in this environment that I feel is safer, but it's happening. It's happening, and I see it.
Yeah, we lived in Madison, Wisconsin, and we moved out of Madison to change our school. And while we were doing that, the Madison School District was arguing at the Supreme Court of Wisconsin level to preserve safe spaces. Safe spaces, by their definition, were spaces in which they could work independently with the children to help them transition their gender without informing the parents. That was called a safe space. Now, thankfully, they failed, at least at one stage at the Supreme Court level, to secure these safe spaces. But a safe space under that definition was one in which the parents were not allowed, so that the school could help affirm the child's gender that the child supposedly was identifying with. And of course, we have all kinds of things going on in the medical field, which are largely driven by profit motives and who knows what else, but at a minimum, it's simply a profit motive. where this is an almost unimaginable source of revenue to help children, right, undergo procedures that will cause them health problems for the rest of their life, both physical, mental, emotional, and in my opinion, spiritual, for their life, right? At an age where it's far, far, far too young for them to be making such decisions, right? And certainly the parents should have, a say in whatever is happening to their children, right? So, um, under the banner of woke, right? This is but one of the new ideas, right, that have permeated society, right? Um,
But it's actually
in
also
future,
very old, because if you look at
this
the
very
Roman
true,
times,
very, very true,
that at the end
right?
of the Roman Empire, sexuality was extremely open. But
Absolutely.
I'll
There's
say
also,
when it
there's
comes
also, go ahead.
no. So when it comes to children, I'll simply say that this whole idea, 7 million per child that transitions. 70% of children that have been transitioned recently have autism, or at least on the spectrum. They are eugenics 3.0. They are just taking them out of the pool because transitioning them causes a few side effects, permanent problems with your bones, infertility, sexual drive possibly destroyed for life. Your relationships will be a mess, and that's the reality of the situation. Is you have to allow the child to grow up, because the majority of the cases where these children have these feelings, 90% of the time they grow out of them. So if we have to look at those data points and see that Sweden stopped doing it, the UK started to stop doing it, we just have to follow, because the Swedish started it, and now they are like realizing, okay, the data actually shows this is very harmful for children. Now, therapy is speaking about it. Yes, do that. Understand that, be comfortable with your body. That's the most important thing. Just be comfortable with your body. You're
And
not
love
born
your
in the wrong
love.
body.
Mhm. Yeah.
So we're out of time. Covered a lot of ground today. In future episodes, we'll dig deeper into this and other topics. We'll move on from just the woke side of things and explore other aspects of how we can look deeper into the underlying reality and come to a greater understanding of where we should move forward as a species. Once again, to summarize the overarching point of this show, created in the image of God, the role of religion in society. One of the key questions here that we've poked at, but we haven't addressed directly, is the role of the individual, the role of our community, and the role of our institutions, right? So as we move through some of in our discussion points today, that people have looked in the institutions, because the institutions have not been trustworthy, right? But the institutions are built by us, right? We do establish the forms of government in the modern era that we have chosen. Now that's debatable, right, as to what kind of choice we really have. But some of the underlying premises of Western civilization, and in particular this United States of America, is that underlying freedom of self-determination, right? So how did we get here, right? How did we get to this point of challenge and mess, these inflection points, where some of the most basic common sense principles are being so grievously violated? It is our position, our bias, if you will, that it comes from moving away from the revealed word of God and not reading the greatest revelation that God has given us properly, namely the creation itself. We, as we explore science, are only beginning to put together the alphabet that is needed to read and interpret this great creation, which we are a part of, right? That that a union of religion and scientific study and scientific inquiry is the stage where we are at as a species. And we'll continue to explore that intersection, perhaps with a little more focus and clarity going forward. But Lewis, I want to thank you for joining us here tonight. We want to have you back on the show to dig into some of these topics in the future. As we wrap up here, are there any places you would like to point people to know more about you, to learn more about what you're involved in? We really didn't spend much time, still waiting for those guesses to come in as to where you're at philosophically, where you're at religiously. Those may have to be saved for a future appearance on the show, because I didn't really see many. Saw a lot of good comments, but no one really trying to nail you down or pin you down on that. And perhaps you're a difficult person to put a label on.
Oh, I mean, some of my friends have very warped views of what I am and who I am based off just what they perceive on the internet. So they see me in one way, and then they listen to me. It's like, oh, I thought you were this. I'm like, no, I'm this. Oh, okay. It's just, reality is what you built yourself it to be at the end of the day. That's really what it is. It's what you decided reality was. And that's the problem we sometimes can have, is that we can coexist in this planet, but we can see the world through completely different lenses. And that then distorts our ideas and then creates this tribalism. And that tribalism can become very toxic with time. And that's what certain people use to exploit for power, because it's the easiest way to attain power is to push one group against the other and absorb resources from one group as a rebellion towards another. And you can find me in luisenriquezrivera.com, and I work with a bunch of amazing human beings at Unconstitutional Awakening, where we speak about similar topics to this. To have some of you guys there as well, if you like to have a chat, and to just discover what we can see.
Awesome. So I want to just address one final comment here. I've asked our show host to share this. One of the commenters has said self-determination on Tran, right? So I want to comment on that real briefly and invite this person back again. Nothing we've said here is intended to take away your self-determination, right? What we've been speaking to is the coercive effort to conform the rest of society to your views. Now, in fairness, as I've stated earlier, religion has often become coercive. And as I've stated, it's my view that whenever that happens, corruption of religion. If you recall, I emphasized the book of Genesis and the Garden of Eden, in which God told Adam and Eve not to eat of a certain tree, right? But he put them in the garden. He made the tree available to them. And I'm just speaking as if the story were real, right? You can believe whatever you want about the story, myth, whatever, but taking the story at face value, he created the garden. He put them in the garden. He created the serpent. He gave the serpent the ability to talk and to influence and to deceive Eve. And gave them a choice, and he let them make their choice. Right? So, if you, again, not coercive, rules were set, was given, a pep talk was given. Later in Deuteronomy, this pep talk is repeated, in which God says, I set before you life and death. And then he says there. But it gives you freedom of choice. And even God gives us freedom of choice. I've written a trilogy. My third book gets into my own particular view from a physics perspective, how that works, how it is that an omniscient being who created time and space and therefore should know everything within it has actually created the ability for you to nonetheless make individual free choice. This ancient theological debate about self-determination and whether it's fate. We can get into that sometime. But I mean this in the most positive way. possible. We are not saying anything about anyone's inability to be self-determining, right? But society as a whole does have to come up with certain rules and laws, such as if you want to identify as a mass murderer, society may in fact have something against that. But on the issue of trans, we are not saying you don't have the right to determine your own self, right? But we're saying that society has the right to put limits on how we force and coerce those, such as children.
Children don't
To
have the
make similar
physical, the
decisions.
mental capacity to do it. You're not an adult technically until you're 25, and the actual risk these children pose to themselves is not told to them. So it's really about, you can do what you have the choice when you're an adult. That's it. That's
Absolutely.
really what people are asking about. They're not saying
And this is
trans people
also-
don't exist. Trans people exist. I have an amazing friends that amazing people in my life that are that way. I'm not against any of it. It just, we have to understand that children cannot be simply told one thing, that they don't have the chemistry. They don't have the chemistry to understand it.
Another comment that we didn't share, there's been a number of good comments. Religion and science coming together, good luck. Well, my point in bringing this up was also to address that comment, right? This merging, as I've alluded to, of religion and science. Louis, you were just referring to childhood development. In a past life, I was a minister, and I remember giving a sermon on Piaget and his early childhood, his development into the early childhood development, right? And discussing that in the context of faith and what faith is. So exactly, science is showing that your brain development does not reach its maturity until about age 25. There are different stages before that, but certain 15 being another one as a general rule, right? But to have any discussion about a transition like that, to have any discussion about medical intervention in your physical body to map your physical body and structure to your mental concept before you're 15 is criminal child abuse, in my opinion, no matter how, why, ever. Right?
It is simply
So
because it
that's
stunts
where
their
I'm
growth.
coming from.
It damages them. It damages them. That's it.
And forever.
Puberty
And it
causes
hurt
permanent damage to their bodies. That's it.
long term. Agreed.
The science is in. It is
Further,
damaging
again, the
to
role of
human
the
beings.
parents. The role of the parents. Social sciences for decades have been almost targeting the destruction of the nuclear family, and thus, exposing children to violence and to and I mean psychological violence, right? Exposing children to criminal. I went to school in Sweden as a kid, and in Sweden, all advertising that was directed at children was banned, right? All of it. And here in America, for example, entire shows and industries are built around products that are nothing more than advertisements for children, right? And all of this was banned in Swedish society because they were more aware of and concerned. They were more aware of and concerned about their children than we in America were, right? So, Michael, thank you for that comment. We will maybe pick that up next time. I appreciate that being shared. I don't want to go further into that discussion at this time, especially as we're over time. But we can pick that up. You can also reach out to us at info@soupllc.com. Would love to talk to you. There are a number of comments about this. So this is apparently a comment of interest. And I'd like to say that I'm very pleased. I'm very pleased that we have participants who may be on the other side of the discussion from us. And we can perhaps take the time to have a show in which we dive a little bit deeper into that, and we can come prepared to dive into some of those topics. As it is right now, we're already over time. So I want to thank everybody. Do click that like button, click the subscribe button, share this show with your friends, check out Luis's blogs, check out Jacqueline's art, and we will be back here again with you next week at this same time, same place. Thank you for coming to join us on this launch of our new show format. Hope you like it, and we'll be back with a very fascinating guest next time. I'm so out of time that I'm not even going to share who it is, but we'll look forward to introducing him at the beginning of next week's show.